How many people feel like a failure or like they failed at something in life? Maybe you didn't get the job offer or the exam grades, or you're just not where you want to be yet in life. You expected things to go a certain way, yet instead they flatlined and tanked. If that sounds like you, then we're on the same page. Welcome to the video. Last year, my Etsy shop really did not do well. It completely flatlined. Every time someone asked me about, oh, how's your business going? I felt so much shame, like a heavily weighted blanket on my shoulders, because it was doing shit. I felt like a complete and utter failure. I literally felt like I was doing everything right, and yet nothing was changing. Nothing was happening. They were just crickets. Fun times. In fact, I felt like a whole failure in my entire life. I was 28, not where I wanted to be. Everything I tried, I failed at. I was trying everything to try and change my mindset and my life, and yet nothing was sticking. There was a point last year where I just hit rock bottom and I felt like a complete and utter failure. So I made a reel highlighting the fact that I felt that way. And it was at that point that I realized that so many other people felt the same way. That reel went viral because so many of us were in the same boat. And so I started to think there must be a way of helping us feel less of a failure. And then I was suddenly reminded of this really simple technique that I came up with back in 2020 to help reframe the sense of being a failure. And it goes like this. So back in the pandemic, 2020, the first lockdown, my friend asked me, hey, do you want to FaceTime? And I was like, no, are you mad? Me being a socially anxious person, FaceTiming someone else was a very daunting prospect. Yet everyone around me was FaceTiming. They were doing the Skypes and the Zooms and the house parties. Everyone was doing it at that point, but I couldn't. Pretty sure there was one time when I was on my phone scrolling away and he did FaceTime me. And I saw the reflection of this girl going bright red and I was like, ooh, okay. And I just waited for it to stop ringing. I was like, okay, no one's gonna know. But I knew, and I felt that sense of a failure, and I felt that shame that I was 26 and could not pick up FaceTime to my friend. And yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small failure in comparison to a lot of other stuff, but it held so much shame and so much embarrassment when other people can answer like that and not have a massive anxiety attack. I remember I went to bed that night so angry at myself, and I was like, why can't you do this? Like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just answer the goddamn phone? And then when I woke up in the morning, I sat up in bed and I literally said out loud to myself, Kate, it's a starting point. And I said to myself, it's a starting point, because I really wanted to be able to look back at that point, whether that be in a few weeks, a few months, or a few years, and be like, wow, look at me. Look at how much I've grown. Look at me now. And sitting here today, a few years later, I can honestly look back at that time when I could not FaceTime my friend and be like, wow, look at how far I have come. Because not only can we FaceTime now, but I FaceTime him first. I'm like, hey, how's it going? I went from this scared little girl going bright red, not picking up the phone, to this empowering woman. It's a starting point. By saying and reframing failure like that, I was setting myself up to win, not fail. Failure depicts the end of the road, right? It's like a solid stake in the ground to say, that's it, that's the end. You've done everything, you tried to change, and it's not working. The end, goodbye, see you later on your bike. But reframing failure to say it's a starting point expands the mind, because now you've got space to experiment. You've got this whole journey yet to experience. Because now the possibility of that dream goal, that big thing you're working towards, it's now relevant. It seems possible again. It's back in the game. When we say something is a failure, it diminishes the light that dream was once beaming out. You're essentially punching out the light bulb and boom, everything's gone dark. It's all gone black. But when we reframe failure to say it's a starting point, you're screwing a new light bulb back in that beams brighter and stronger, and hey, suddenly you can see you're standing on solid ground again. Metaphors. And it gives you space to reflect and think, okay, How can this be different? What have I learned from these failures that can provide change and nourishment going forward? You're essentially saying the road doesn't end here. I've got shit to do, baby. I think failure is very much having like blinders on. Like you can only see what's right in front of you. Everything else is shut off. When you zoom out and say, hey, it's a starting point, those blinders, they come off and you can see the horizon again. You can see the entire picture. And don't get me wrong, you can't just sit back and say, hey, it's a starting point and then twiddle your thumbs waiting for change to happen. No, you've got to put in the work to make the change. That should be obvious enough. But instead it comes from a starting point of love and acceptance rather than fear and shame that you're a failure. It's a compassionate way of treating yourself. Because I know when we feel like a failure at something, self-destructive mode kicks in, we start to blame ourselves, we start to shame ourselves. And let me tell you now, that does not get you anywhere. But if we can come back to a place of love and compassion and patience for ourselves, we can start to reframe our failure as an empowering force that will propel us along the way towards that ultimate goal. And people say it's the journey that matters. It's not necessarily the goal itself, because you learn so much more along the way on the journey. And I thought that if I could reframe that FaceTime failure and it help in that situation, then by definition, it would help in other bigger situations too. So whether you feel like a failure in your business, you didn't get the exam grade you wanted or the job offer, or you feel like a failure because you're not when you want to be and life has turned out completely different to how you expected, and then you start comparing yourself to other people who are moving forward and who are making the money and buying the houses and having the great relationships and traveling the world, and you're stuck in this place of shame and despair, I see you. I see you and I love you, and I'm so proud you're here, willing to try something different in order to make a change. We've got this. We're a team in this, okay? We've got this. And hey, I understand it. I really do. I understand what it's like being in that place of despair and feeling like a failure, because for a good chunk of 2022, I was stuck in the mode of,
I'm a failure.
I was in negative figures in my business. Of course I was going to feel like a failure. But what it did is it highlighted to me that something wasn't right. I needed to address the friction. So I started to say, it's a starting point. And I began to rethink and refocus, and eventually I worked out what the problem was. I didn't want to be a full-time Etsy shop owner. There, I said it. I wanted to help people feel a little less alone and a little more connected by creating these kinds of YouTube videos to help you guys out with what you're struggling. And I wanted to have the Etsy shop as a supporter to the video. So for example, this sweatshirt, I make this sweatshirt in my Etsy shop. Embroidery, it's beautiful, I love it. And now this sweatshirt is supporting the video and vice versa. But ultimately, I made this sweatshirt to help remind you and me that it's not a failure. It's a starting point. But if you do like this kind of thing, definitely check out the link below. Deliver worldwide, different colors available, embroidery or just a normal print, you decide. So I started saying,
It's a starting point.
and it's been a really powerful, solid tool to help reframe failure and regain motivation and power to continue. But continue on a nourishing path now that I've learned what doesn't work. And there's gonna be bumps along the way, there always will be. But what it comes down to is this. Failure is valuable. Failure is a stepping stone to the ultimate goal. You learn so much more when you fail than when you win. You learn what didn't work out. You learn what strategies you need to change, new habits you need to develop, or just a different direction to go in altogether. Failure is valuable because it highlights the areas that need to be improved or changed in order to fulfill the dream or goal you have. Look at J.K. Rowling, for example. She got rejected 12 times for a manuscript of Harry Potter before finally being published. Look at Bill Gates, who failed tremendously in his first business and then went on to build Microsoft. Jim Carrey failed, Steven Spielberg failed, yet they all went on to be successful people. That could be you in a year's time, retelling this success story of how you failed 100 times, but succeeded because of it. And when we look at these successful people, we only see the tip of the iceberg, right? We see the success that they cultivated. Yet when you look at the entire iceberg, you start to see the failures, the rejections, the parts that did not go right. Failure is essential to success. And it starts by saying one simple thing. It's a starting point.